In 1997, I had repeatedly put off investigating a private elementary school for our son. It was May, and our firstborn was beginning kindergarten that September, but my husband and I still hadn't decided on what school he'd attend. I had seen a brochure of an independent private school near my workplace by LAX, the airport. However, I kept procrastinating contacting the school for more information regarding their curriculum, administration, tuition, facilities, etc. We were rather nervous parents at the time. While placing the school inquiry lower on my to-do list, I subsequently scheduled a visit that month to our local Social Security office to take place during my lunch break. I needed to register a toddler daughter in the Social Security system. I was careful to plan, manage, and monitor my trip to the SS office one afternoon because I only had a 1-hour break for lunch. I knew from working at my office for 2 years that it typically took approximately 10 to 15 minutes to drive from my job to the area where the Social Security building was located. I estimated that I would only have 30 minutes to complete paperwork, stand in line, pay, and receive a receipt for my daughter's card. That Thursday afternoon, upon arriving at the SS building, I kept looking at my watch nervously because I needed to be back at work by 1 p.m. I felt like I was in the building forever. I had to stand in 2 lines after receiving a call number from the counter. 2 or 3 men struck up conversations with me after one of them joked about my toned calves. "Hey, lay off the Stairmaster a bit," the one told me while the others cackled good-naturedly and I smiled. I was there long enough to form a light camaraderie with some of the other patrons, as I typically do in DMVs, doctors, and dental offices, since I'm friendly and outgoing by nature. After I'd finished all of the processes, I walked quickly to my car, noticing my watch read 12:45 p.m. I distinctly recall my mind going into autopilot mode as I drove back to work, because, boom, I returned to consciousness to realize I was on Arbor Vitae Street, just a few feet away from Westchester Neighborhood School, the school I had been intending to research for our son. But no, even though I was right in front of the school, there was no way I could stop and go inside to obtain information about it, because I only had about 5 minutes left before my lunch break was over. That was what I told myself. At that moment, I glanced at my car's dashboard clock and silently freaked out, because the clock showed 12:30 p.m., and so did my watch. I mouthed the words, "No way," then quickly processed everything there was no rational explanation for. I shouldn't have any time to investigate the school, but I did. Almost 30 minutes to do so. So of course, the only logical thing to do at that point was to go with it. Turn my car into the school's parking lot, park into the only available parking space, allow my legs to walk into the building, hear myself ask the reception if they still had openings for fall kindergarten, not act surprised when she smiled and said, "Yes, we do," and nod yes when she handed me an application and asked if I'd like to schedule for a tour. Those actions combined surely took at least 20 minutes. Afterwards, I walked back to my car, got in, and drove back to work in time to enter my office at 1 p.m. Everything else was simple after that. That was the school our son was supposed to and did attend, along with our daughter 2 years later. I'm not sure this is considered a time slip, but I don't know how else to explain it. Back in 1968, my parents had just divorced. We lived in Sunnyvale, California, and my dad was coming over to pick up my 3 brothers and myself to drive to Disneyland. I was 7 years old. My brothers were 5, 8, and 11 years old. My dad worked that day, so we were getting a late start. Sunnyvale is about a 5 to 6 hour drive, I think, to LA. I remember waking up to the sound of my dad driving over gravel, and it was dark, so it must have been fairly late. When I looked out the window, we were parked outside a big, beautiful Victorian house. To me, it was a palace because I have never seen a house like that. My dad said it was a hotel. He asked me and my middle brother if we wanted to go inside with him to see if we could get a room while my older brother waited out in the car with my sleeping younger brother. We went inside and it was beautiful, all oak and red carpeting. We went up to this big oak desk with a brass rail that my brother and I stood on so we could see over the desk. My dad rang a bell, and this elderly woman with gray hair pinned on top of her head and dressed in a long black Victorian dress came out to talk to my dad. I still remember the sound of that dress when she walked. It was like a swooshing sound. She had us walk down a long red carpeted hallway to our 2 rooms that were connected by a shared bathroom. I was awoken to the sound of birds tweeting outside our window in a big tree and to my brothers laughing in the bathtub. As we were leaving, we walked through a big empty dining room and outside where there were little tables set up on the wide stairs with a bunch of people sitting sipping coffee or tea out of pretty little teacups while holding the saucer in their other hand. They always reminded me of looking like Jackie Kennedy with the little hat and matching dress. And the men looked like Cary Grant or Ward Cleaver from the TV show Leave It to Beaver. My dad was carrying my little brother and holding my hand while my 2 other brothers followed behind. The people were all smiling at us and saying things like, "Look at the beautiful children. How precious. They're so well behaved. Such darlings." We finally get down the stairs and drive to Disneyland, where we spend 2 days and headed back home. As we were making our way over the stretch of highway known as the Grapevine, my dad asked if we wanted to stop at the hotel we stayed in to eat our lunch. Of course, we all said yes. As we returned into the gravel road, we noticed that the wooden hotel sign was all destroyed. When we got to the hotel, it was in shambles. The big doors had one missing, the other dangling from its remaining hinge. The windows were gone. The porch had big gaping holes where the boards were missing. What was left of the paint was peeling off. You could see the sun shining through the doorway of the missing roof. This hotel couldn't possibly have had any guest for at least the last 100 years. My dad drove out of there like a bat out of hell. Over the following 50+ years, none of us really talked about it, except to ask one another, "Remember that hotel? Yeah, what was that all about?" A few years before my dad died, he came to visit me and asked, "Do you remember that hotel we went to before Disneyland?" And I just replied, "That was the weirdest thing that had ever happened to me." We never had conversations about it. I wish we would have. But now my dad and middle brother are gone. My youngest brother just started quoting Bible phrases when you bring it up. My older brother thinks all the perfect people on those stairs sipping tea were people who probably died in car crashes on the Grapevine. I should look up all the weird stuff that happens on that stretch of highway, and that might explain a little bit more of what happened to us. So like I said, I don't think it could be time slipping because the old lady from the night before was definitely dressed from a different era that people were sipping tea. They were more like late 50s, early 60s, and this happened in the summer of 1968. In 1998, I moved back to the area I grew up in to look after my dad who'd had a stroke. I bought a small 2-bed Edwardian terrace in the next village. The house was at the end of a block of 4. The middle back gardens were split by a 1-story block of outhouses. They used to be the rooms where personal washing and clothes washing would take place, but were now storerooms. About 3 months after I moved in, I was washing dishes at the kitchen sink, gazing out the window at a sunny but cold March day and dreaming about nothing in particular. At one point, I glanced out of the window, and everything stopped. The garden no longer looked like mine, with a scrubby lawn, old shed, fish pond, rockery, and shrubs. Instead, the garden was open and spread out. It was now a large vegetable and flower plot, with runner bean wigwams, neat lines of cabbages, onions, carrots, peas, tomatoes, and dahlias. The outhouse, which is now painted white with black wooden doors, was plain brick and wood. I could now see the path that ran alongside it, as it was no longer obscured by rocks or greenery. It was a herringbone brick path, and walking away from me down the garden was a man. He was in his 60s, broadly built but not very tall. He had a flat head with a shock of white hair. It was sunny in his world too, and his hair stood out starkly. He was wearing a camel-colored cow gown that reached almost to his ankles and had long sleeves. It's a farming area around here, and the overcoats were worn to protect clothing whilst milking. I must have only been observing for a few minutes, but it felt a lot longer. Eventually, I looked down at the washing up, then back out of the window, and it had all returned to normal. I pondered over it for a while, but a few weeks later I'd almost forgotten about it. Then one day, a neighbor came to visit. He was someone I used to know when growing up in the village, but only to say hello to. We sat having a cup of tea and chatting about the various people we knew, when I found myself telling him about the strange scene in my garden a few weeks before. I described the allotment-style garden. I was just describing the man I saw walking down the path, when my neighbor said, "Did he have a shock of white hair?" I told him he'd just taken the words right out of my mouth. My neighbor replied, "That was my Uncle Ernie. He used to live in the house next door, and gardening was his world. He wore that cow gown as he used to work part-time on a farm, but he died in the 50s. Maybe what I experienced was a time slip, a glitch, or an imprint from the past. I don't know. It's not something I've witnessed before or since. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you liked it. If you have your own scary story or close encounter to share, you can either send it in the comments, post on my subreddit, r/ihaveaspookystory, or send it to my Gmail, pinkpossiblystories@gmail.com. Maybe your story will be in a future video. Good night, sleep tight, and don't let the shadows bite.